Progressive rock has always lived in a strange contradiction. It claims freedom, experimentation, and artistic risk, yet it is constantly judged by how well it fits into systems built for repetition. No one understood this contradiction better than Frank Zappa. To him, progressive rock was not a sound, not a style, and certainly not a marketing label. It was simply whatever refused to sound like everything else. That definition quietly explains much of Jethro Tull's history and why some of their most thoughtful songs were left behind. From the outside, Jethro Tull often looked like a band with a clear identity. Flute-led rock, British folk influences, long compositions, and a frontman who looked permanently allergic to convention. But inside the music, nothing was stable. Album to album, sometimes song to song, Ian Anderson treated the band as a laboratory rather than a brand. Styles shifted, tones darkened, politics crept in, electronics appeared and vanished again. Predictability was never part of the plan. And in the logic Frank Zappa lived by, that unpredictability was the entire point. Yet, unpredictability comes with a cost. When a band refuses to repeat itself, some songs inevitably fall into the void. Not because they fail, but because they do not behave. Jethro Tull's catalog is filled with those quiet casualties of creativity. Songs that make perfect sense artistically, but never aligned with what listeners, radio, or history expected. One of the clearest examples arrived early with Christmas Song in 1968. On paper, it should have become a seasonal staple. Instead, it remained oddly invisible outside the band's core audience. The reason lies in its refusal to play the traditional role of Christmas music. Rather than leaning into comfort, nostalgia, or religious certainty, the song treats the holiday as something broader, more human, and quietly ironic. In a musical landscape where Christmas songs survive by being endlessly reusable, Christmas Song was too specific, too thoughtful, and too unconcerned with tradition to be endlessly replayed. This kind of misalignment was something Zappa constantly warned about. Music that questions its own setting rarely thrives inside it. As a result, Christmas Song became respected rather than celebrated, admired, but rarely embraced. That same tension between intention and reception defines Fallen on Hard Times, released in the early 1980s. Jethro Tull were not typically framed as a political band, but this track made its concerns impossible to ignore. It addressed failure at the top, false promises, and the slow erosion of trust between those in power and those beneath them. Unlike some of the band's more symbolic writing, the narrative here was direct, almost confrontational. Ironically, that directness made the song harder to absorb. It arrived during a period when audiences increasingly expected either escapism or spectacle, not uncomfortable reflection wrapped in progressive rock. In Zappa's worldview, this was another familiar outcome. Say something clearly, and fewer people will thank you for it. By the 1990s, Jethro Tull found themselves in a different kind of exile. Progressive rock had lost its cultural centrality, and veteran bands were expected either to chase modern trends or live off nostalgia. After experimenting with electronic textures throughout the 1980s, the band unexpectedly turned inward on roots to branches. The album reconnected with older musical instincts, layered arrangements, melodic patience, and organic instrumentation. At its center sat Stuck in the August Rain, a song that felt quietly confident rather than attention-seeking. It did not attempt to modernize itself for relevance, nor did it try to replicate past glories. It simply existed as a mature reflection of what Jethro Tull had always done best. But maturity rarely generates headlines. The album passed without ceremony, and the song followed it into obscurity. Zappa would have recognized this immediately. Music that refuses to advertise itself tends to vanish in an industry that rewards noise over nuance. Earlier still, Reasons for Waiting suffered from the opposite problem. Released on Stand Up in 1969, it was trapped inside an album overflowing with ambition and quality. Rather than being dismissed, the song was overshadowed. It lacked the theatrical edge of some tracks and avoided dramatic excess in favor of emotional restraint. Strings carried its weight, not volume or virtuosity. In an album that helped define the band's future, Reasons for Waiting quietly did its job and stepped aside. It became respected rather than remembered. Another example of how excellence can sometimes erase itself when surrounded by more obvious statements. Perhaps the most misunderstood case is Working John, Working Joe, released in 1980. The album A arrived during a confusing moment for the band, originally conceived as a solo project before being rebranded as a Jethro Tull release. Heavy synthesizers, colder textures, and a noticeable stylistic departure alienated many listeners immediately. As a result, the album was often dismissed wholesale. Buried inside it, however, was a song that revealed unusual self-awareness. Working John. Working Joe explored the psychological cost of obsession with work, the slow erosion of personal identity, and the isolation that can come with creative discipline. Written by a relatively young Anderson, it carried insight that felt older than its author. But because the album itself was rejected, the song never had a chance to speak. Frank Zappa built entire careers on moments like this. Songs ignored not for what they were, but for where they appeared. Taken together, these tracks form a pattern rather than a coincidence. They were not designed to be singles. They did not repeat formulas. They refused to flatter their audience. And in doing so, they perfectly embodied the philosophy Zappa articulated throughout his life. Progress in music is rarely rewarded immediately. Jethro Tull did not lose these songs by accident. They sacrificed them to curiosity, to movement, and to the refusal to stay still. In an industry obsessed with sameness, that refusal comes at a price. Decades later, as progressive rock continues to be re-examined and reclaimed, these overlooked tracks feel less like mistakes and more like proof. Proof that Jethro Tull were never interested in being comfortable, and proof that Frank Zappa's definition still holds. If it doesn't sound like everything else, it probably wasn't meant to be popular.